That opening shot of The Sound of Music is really the quintessential picture postcard shot, really. And yet we had such terrible difficulties shooting that scene.
There are films that entertain you, and then there are films that become a permanent part of you. The Sound of Music, released in 1965 by 20th Century Fox and directed by Robert Wise, belongs firmly in that second category. For over 6 decades, audiences around the world have returned again and again to the rolling hills of Salzburg, the laughter of 7 children, the commanding presence of a naval captain, and the irresistible warmth of a young woman named Maria. The film swept the Academy Awards, taking home 5 Oscars including Best Picture and Best Director, and it went on to become one of the highest-grossing movies ever made. It is, by almost any measure, a masterpiece. But masterpieces have secrets. Behind every perfectly framed shot, every note of those iconic songs, and every tear-jerking moment, there is a story you were never meant to see. Continuity errors that slipped past the editors. Historical liberties that changed real people's lives. On-set incidents so chaotic they sound like something out of a comedy. And details hiding in plain sight that, once you notice them, you simply cannot unsee. So today, we are going slow. We are looking closer. Because this film, beloved, celebrated, and endlessly rewatched, is full of surprises that the cameras accidentally captured and that history quietly recorded. From a child nearly drowning during a scene that looks perfectly peaceful, to a leading man who needed to be personally chased down in London just to accept the role, to a woman who unknowingly signed away her own life story for less than the cost of a used car today, the real story of The Sound of Music is even wilder than the one on screen. Let's begin. Few opening sequences in cinema history are as instantly recognizable as Julie Andrews spinning on that alpine hilltop, arms wide, the camera swooping down toward her like a bird catching the wind. It looks effortless. It looks divine. It was, in reality, a complete nightmare to film. The opening aerial shot was captured in the Salzkammergut region of Austria, and the production crew had to coordinate a helicopter to circle Andrews at just the right altitude while she performed the famous spin. The downdraft from the helicopter's rotor blades was so powerful that it repeatedly knocked Andrews off her feet the moment the aircraft came close enough to film her. She would get up, regain her composure, and try again, only to be knocked down once more. This happened take after take. According to multiple accounts from the film's production, Andrews fell into the muddy Austrian grass so many times during that sequence that the crew began to find it darkly funny, though they were careful not to laugh too obviously in front of her. Andrews herself later recalled it with good humor, noting that she spent a significant portion of that shoot picking herself up off the ground. The shot that made it into the final film, that gorgeous, soaring, triumphant image, was built on repeated failure, mud, and a great deal of persistence. When audiences watch Maria strumming her guitar and singing to the Von Trapp children, they see confidence, warmth, and natural ability. What they do not see is the weeks of beginner lessons that preceded every single one of those scenes, because Julie Andrews had no guitar experience whatsoever before being cast in the film. Andrews worked hard to learn the basics, but she freely admitted that coordinating her singing with her guitar playing while also acting, hitting her marks, and managing the emotional tone of each scene was genuinely overwhelming. According to accounts from the production period, she occasionally took a small sip of Austrian schnapps, a local spirit, before filming particularly difficult guitar scenes, not to impair her judgment but simply to calm her nerves enough to get through the take. Christopher Plummer, cast as Captain Von Trapp, was in a similar boat. He took both guitar and singing lessons specifically for his role. He rehearsed. He prepared. And then, in the final cut of the film, none of it was used. The studio brought in a professional singer to dub Plummer's vocals, and a professional guitarist to replace his strumming. All that preparation, erased. It is a detail that speaks volumes about the pressures of Hollywood filmmaking, and about the gap between the polished image on screen and the messy human reality behind it. The scene where the Von Trapp family tips out of a rowboat appears light and comedic in the finished film. Children splash into the water, chaos ensues, and the whole thing has a kind of playful energy. But what the camera did not capture was the genuine terror happening just below the surface. Kim Carruth, the young actress who played Gretel, the youngest of the Von Trapp children, could not swim. Not a little. Not at all. When the boat capsized, everyone went into the water, and the plan was for Julie Andrews, playing Maria, to immediately grab Kim and pull her to safety. That plan fell apart instantly. Andrews lost her own footing when the boat flipped and fell backward, leaving Kim without anyone to reach her in time. Kim Carruth swallowed a significant amount of water before crew members could intervene. She became ill as a direct result, and in what became one of the more uncomfortable legends of the production, she vomited on Heather Menzies, the actress playing Louisa. Carruth recovered fully, but those who were present described it as one of the more frightening moments of the entire shoot. The finished scene gives no indication that anything went wrong. That is, when you think about it, either a testament to the magic of filmmaking, or a quiet reminder of how much suffering can be hidden behind a polished final product. Christopher Plummer was, to put it diplomatically, not enthusiastic about The Sound of Music. He had been reluctant to take the role from the start, having turned it down multiple times before director Robert Wise traveled personally to London to convince him in a face-to-face meeting. Even after agreeing, Plummer remained resistant to the project's tone. He reportedly found the material too sentimental, too wholesome, too relentlessly cheerful for his tastes. He referred to the film with several unflattering nicknames throughout production, calling it, among other things, The Sound of Mucus, a pun that tells you everything you need to know about his feelings. To cope with his discomfort on set, Plummer ate and drank heavily during filming. The weight he gained was substantial enough that the costume department had to repeatedly alter and resize his wardrobe throughout the production. What makes this story particularly striking is the irony of it. Plummer's performance as Captain Von Trapp is widely considered one of the most compelling elements of the film. His restraint, his authority, the way his emotional walls slowly come down, it is a genuinely great piece of acting. The man who privately mocked the project delivered one of its most enduring performances. He later acknowledged, in interviews toward the end of his life, that he had come to respect how deeply the film had affected people, even if the making of it was not his happiest professional memory. If you have ever visited Salzburg hoping to stand in front of the Von Trapp family home and recognize it from the film, you may have been confused, and with good reason. The house that appears in The Sound of Music does not actually exist as a single structure. It is a cinematic composite. The exterior shots of the front of the house were filmed at one location, the Frauenberg Palace, used for the front facade, while a separate building, the Leopoldskron Palace, was used to provide the back exterior and the lake shots. Neither building's interior was used at all. All interior scenes were filmed on specially constructed sets built on soundstages in Hollywood. The iconic Gazebo, where Liesel and Rolf perform 16 going on 17, was not a pre-existing Austrian structure. It was built from scratch for the film. After production ended, it was moved twice and now sits on the grounds of Hellbrunn Palace in Salzburg, where tourists can visit it. Even the Abbey courtyard scenes, which look extraordinarily authentic, were filmed on a Hollywood replica created by production designer Boris Levin. His recreation was so precise, matching specific stonework, window dimensions, and architectural details, that many visitors to the actual Nürnberg Abbey still assume the film was shot there. It was not. Almost nothing in the film is quite where it appears to be. This is perhaps the single most common misconception attached to The Sound of Music, and it is a stubborn one. The gentle, heartfelt song that Captain Von Trapp sings as a quiet act of defiance against the encroaching Nazi presence, the one that feels like a centuries-old Austrian lullaby, was written in New York City by two Americans for a Broadway show. Richard Rodgers composed the music and Oscar Hammerstein II wrote the lyrics. Edelweiss premiered on Broadway in 1959, when The Sound of Music first opened as a stage musical. It has no roots in Austrian folk tradition whatsoever. It is not, has never been, and was never intended to be the national anthem of Austria, though a remarkable number of people around the world believe otherwise. The song carries a particular weight in the story of The Sound of Music beyond its fictional setting. It was the last song that Rodgers and Hammerstein ever wrote together. Oscar Hammerstein II was diagnosed with stomach cancer shortly after the musical opened, and he passed away in August 1960, just 9 months after the Broadway premiere. The quiet dignity of Edelweiss, composed in the final months of their legendary partnership, gives the song a poignancy that extends far beyond the story it was written for. The real Maria von Trapp's relationship with the film adaptation of her own life is one of the more quietly devastating stories in Hollywood history. In 1956, a German film producer approached her with an offer to purchase the rights to her memoir. He offered her $10,000, a meaningful sum, but modest considering what her story would eventually become worth. Maria asked whether she could receive a percentage of future profits from any film made. The producer told her that German law prohibited film companies from paying royalties to non-German citizens, and since Maria had by then become an American citizen, she was legally ineligible. Trusting this explanation, Maria signed the contract and transferred full rights to her life story. A few weeks later, the same producer returned and offered her an additional $9,000 in cash if she would finalize the agreement immediately. For a family that had struggled financially for years, it was an irresistible offer. She accepted. It was only later that Maria discovered the producer had fabricated the legal justification entirely. No such law existed. He had simply lied to her, and she had signed away her story for a fraction of what it was worth. The creators of the American stage and film adaptations, Rodgers and Hammerstein, were under no legal obligation to compensate the Von Trapp family at all. But they chose to provide a small share of earnings as a gesture of goodwill. Maria, for her part, bore no lasting bitterness. She later reflected that the joy the story brought to millions of people around the world was worth more than any sum of money. It is a generous sentiment. It does not change the fact that she was deceived. In the film, Maria is gentle, somewhat clumsy, endearingly naive. She is a dreamer who hums to herself and struggles to fit into convent life because she is too soft, too gentle, too full of wandering thought. The real Maria Augusta Kuchera was something else entirely. By her own description, she was, in her words, absolutely terrible, and she seemed to relish saying so. She broke dishes. She talked when silence was required. She ran in corridors meant for quiet walking. She climbed onto the roof of the convent. She whistled Gregorian chants, which were considered sacred and solemn, turning them into something approaching a personal soundtrack. The nuns found her exhausting. She found the rules stifling. Maria had grown up as an orphan under the care of an abusive uncle, and she arrived at Nonnberg Abbey not as a serene spiritual seeker, but as someone who had been through significant hardship and had developed a personality to match: bold, argumentative, and physically restless. The convent sent her to the Von Trapp household partly because they needed a tutor for George's daughter, and partly, one suspects, because having Maria out of the abbey for a few months gave everyone a much-needed rest. The soft, uncertain young woman on screen was a Hollywood construction. The real Maria was considerably louder. In the film, the romance between Maria and Captain Von Trapp is the emotional spine of the entire story. Their tension, their denial, their eventual acknowledgement of mutual love, it is presented as a classic love story. The real version was considerably more complicated.